My name is Amara. I'm a doctor. And the night I made Seo Jae-hoon laugh for the first time in a month, somebody wired $400,000 into an account in Macau with my name on the contract. I didn't know there were cameras on the house. I didn't know his grief was the only thing keeping his enemies patient. I just danced in a room I thought was empty. And by 4:40 the next morning, a man in a black jacket was standing in my bedroom doorway with a gun, and I was lying on the floor between the bed and the wall with a scalpel in one hand, and I already knew I was going to hurt him. I already knew I was going to do it first. Let me back up. I need you to understand how I got here, because even now, 6 months later, I still wake up sometimes and forget which kitchen I'm in. I met him on a Tuesday in the emergency room. Nneka had strep. I was covering her double, and it was almost 2 in the morning when the doors slammed open, and 4 men carried in a 5th man who was leaking onto the linoleum. I remember chewing ice from a paper cup that had gone soft hours before. I remember the blood was too dark. Venous. He'd been bleeding a long time. Femoral, one of the men barked at me, then something fast in Korean to the man behind him. Please, please. I don't remember saying anything. I pointed at the trauma bay. My hands were already moving. Tourniquet, pressure, call for packed cells. The patient's face was gray and wet, and he opened his eyes once in the middle of it, and he looked at me like he already knew how the night ended and had decided he didn't mind. His intake form said Kim Daniel. That wasn't his name. We stabilized him. 2.5 hours in the bay, another 4 in recovery. He woke up around sunrise, and I was still in the room because I hadn't slept and I was charting in the corner and I didn't have anywhere better to be. He looked at me for a long time. He didn't say thank you. He said in perfect, unaccented English, "What did you see tonight?" I said, "Nothing I'm supposed to talk about." He said, "That's the right answer." His men came back at 7, and he walked out of my hospital against medical advice with a wound that should have kept him there for a week. And I filed him under strange night and went home and slept for 14 hours. 6 days later, a woman in a black suit walked into the residence lounge and asked for me by name. She said her employer had a position, $170,000 for 6 weeks of private medical care, living on site, NDA. If I said no, no hard feelings, I would never hear from them again. I want to tell you I took the job because I was intrigued, because I wanted an adventure, because I was some brave girl in a movie. I took it because my mother's cancer had come back. My mother worked 31 years cleaning offices in Houston. When she finally retired, her body started falling apart like it had been holding itself together just for the paycheck. The second round of chemo wasn't covered. We were looking at $70,000 out of pocket, minimum, and I still had 6 figures of med school debt, and my sister had 2 kids, and my father was 9 years dead, and the house still had his name on the mortgage. I took the money. I signed the NDA. I didn't read it closely enough. That's on me. Living on his property was not like the movies. It wasn't a palace. It was a large, extremely quiet house in a gated community 20 miles outside the city, with a medical suite in the basement that had better equipment than some hospitals I'd rotated through. My room was upstairs, end of a hall that smelled like cedar and lemon oil. There was a coffee maker that took pods, which I thought was funny. There was a garden with a pond that had actual koi in it. For 6 weeks, Seo Jae-hoon spoke maybe 40 words to me, total. Good morning, that's adequate, change the dressing. No, I don't need anything else. He was beautiful in a way that made me uncomfortable, which I don't say lightly. Tall, thin, expensive. Tattoos that started at his wrists and climbed up his arms and across the back of his neck and down his chest. Black linework so fine it looked like it had bled through the paper of him. Eyes that went through you and didn't stop on the other side. He moved like a man who had been taught as a child that wasted motion gets you killed. He had staples in his thigh from the femoral repair, and 3 older scars I pretended not to see, and a bullet fragment in his left shoulder that had calcified over, which I also pretended not to see. He did nothing with his face. Nothing. It was like being examined by a man carved out of wood. But I'm going to tell you 3 things from those 6 weeks, because they matter later. The first thing, my second morning in the house, I was on hold with my mother's oncology office, packing the hallway outside the medical suite, trying to get a pre-authorization through. I was tired and I was about to cry, and I wasn't hiding it well. He walked past me in a black coat on his way somewhere. He didn't stop. He didn't look at me. 2 hours later, when I came back from my morning rounds, there was a small ceramic cup on the cart outside the medical suite with fresh tea in it. Jeju tangerine, still warm. Nobody was in the house except his men and the housekeeper, and neither of them drank tea, and neither of them would have brought it to me. I drank it. I didn't say anything. The next morning, there was another cup. For 3 weeks straight, every morning there was a cup. The second thing, I was changing his shoulder dressing on a Tuesday. He was sitting on the exam table. No shirt. I had my gloves on and I was cleaning the edge of the old scar tissue around the calcified fragment, and my gloved hand brushed his collarbone by accident and he didn't move. Neither of us moved for about 2 seconds. I pulled my hand back and I said, automatic, sorry. He said, don't. That was all. I didn't know what he meant. I still don't, not exactly. I just know that the word don't from a man who didn't use words sat in my chest all day like a coin in a pocket. The third thing, I woke up at 3:10 in the morning sometime in the 4th week because I thought I'd heard something downstairs, and when I went down in my robe with a stethoscope around my neck like an idiot, he was standing in the doorway of the medical suite with his hand on the doorframe, and he was just standing there, staring at the floor. He looked up when I came down the stairs. He said, I was looking for aspirin. He had access to a whole pharmacy behind the door he was standing in. He wasn't looking for aspirin. I gave him 2 aspirin. I didn't ask. He took them and he said, thank you, doctor, and he went upstairs, and neither of us ever mentioned it again. That was 6 weeks. Those 3 things. I'm telling you them now because by the end of 6 weeks, without him having said anything real to me, I had started looking for him in rooms. And I was a grown woman and a doctor, and I knew what that meant, and I had no business feeling it, and I told myself every night it was nothing. I learned about his brother by accident. I was coming out of the medical suite, and I overheard 2 of his men in the hallway speaking Korean, which they thought I didn't understand. I don't, not really. I took 2 semesters in undergrad, and I can order food and apologize. But I heard the word Hyung, older brother, and the word Jangrai, funeral, which I knew from a drama my cousin had made me watch. One of them said in English then, it's been 4 weeks, he has to eat. The other said, he will when he's ready. That night, Jae-hoon came down for his dressing change, and I really noticed for the first time, that his cheekbones were sharper than they'd been 6 weeks earlier. He hadn't been eating, hadn't been sleeping. I could tell from the skin under his eyes. He was grieving. He was grieving, and nobody in that house was allowed to say his brother's name out loud. I didn't ask. I did my job. I asked for the first time in 3 weeks how he was feeling. He said, fine. That was the whole conversation. The night I danced was a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was the only day of the week the house was nearly empty. Security rotated at 7. Jae-hoon had something he called family dinner at his uncle's house across town, which he'd been skipping since the funeral but was expected to attend that week. His lieutenant said in front of me, you have to go, Ajasi has been asking. Jae-hoon stared at him for a long second and then said, in English so I would understand he wasn't hiding it, fine, I'll go, 1 hour. They left around 7. I had the medical suite to myself. I had a cup of tea that had gone cold on the supply cart, a regular one, not his, and a Bluetooth speaker I'd brought from home, and I was reorganizing the pharmacy cabinet. Someone had clearly let a child stock it, based on the order of the epinephrine versus the lidocaine. I put on a playlist, Burn a Boy, Last, if you know, you know. And I started dancing. I want you to understand something. I'm not a dancer. I'm a doctor. I dance in kitchens and in elevators when nobody's watching. I dance when I'm tired and I need my body to remind me it still belongs to me. That night I was exhausted. 3 calls in 2 days. A surgical debridement on one of his men who'd caught a ricochet in the ribs. A pharmacy reorganization I was doing for free because it was driving me insane. And I was dancing with a bottle of saline in one hand and a clipboard in the other, my socks sliding on the tile, my hair tie slipping down my ponytail because my edges don't hold elastic, and I was singing along badly. The bass was in my chest. The hall light was off. I hadn't turned it on because I'd thought I was alone. I turned around, and he was standing in the doorway. He was in the black coat. He was back early. I don't know how long he'd been there. My throat closed up. The bottle of saline almost slipped out of my hand. I went to apologize, to say something, to make up some professional thing. And he laughed. It was a small laugh, not a big one, a surprised one. It came out of him like it had startled him too, like he hadn't made the sound in so long his body didn't know what to do with it. And when it came out, his face did something I had not seen any part of his face do in 6 weeks. It moved. His eyes crinkled at the corners. His mouth turned up at one side. For about 2 seconds, Seo Jae-hoon looked like a person. Then he caught himself. The laugh died. The face closed. He looked at me, really looked at me, and something passed behind his eyes that I didn't understand in the moment, but would understand later, by about 4 in the morning, when I had a dead man in my hallway and a stranger's gun in my hand. He said, "Sorry." He said, "Please continue." Then he turned around and left. I stood there with Burna Boy still playing, and my hair tie halfway down my neck and the saline bottle sweating in my hand. And I thought, oh no. Because I'd felt something when he laughed. Something I had absolutely no business feeling for a patient. And the worst part was I couldn't tell whether what I felt was the fact that he had laughed or the fact that I had been the one to make him. I went upstairs. I packed my bag. My contract said I could go home on weekends, and I told the guard at the gate that I was leaving a day early because my mother had a doctor's appointment in the morning, which was a lie, and he nodded and said nothing because he was paid not to care. And I drove the 40 minutes back to my apartment in silence because I didn't trust the radio to not play another Burna Boy song. Halfway home, I almost called him. I had his number in my phone under SJH. I picked the phone up at a red light and I stared at the screen and I put it back down. The light turned green. I drove. If I had called him, if I had stayed in that house, I would have had 12 guards between me and the door by midnight. But I drove home. I took off my makeup. I slept for 3 hours. And at 4:40 in the morning, the lock on my apartment door clicked, and I heard the softest footstep you have ever heard in your life. I need to stop here for a second. If you're still with me after all of this, if you haven't wandered off or started scrolling, do me a favor and tap that subscribe button. Tap the bell too, because the next 48 hours of my life are not something I know how to tell you about, and I was there. I was there and I still barely believe it. Okay. Back to the kitchen. My apartment was on the second floor of a 4-unit walk-up in a neighborhood where the landlord had been promising to fix the back stairs for 2 years. I had 2 plants. I had a chipped coffee mug that said World's OKAYESD Doctor that my sister had given me as a joke. I had a cast iron pan on the stove because I'd made eggs 3 days before and hadn't washed it. I had one of those cheap rubber door stops wedged under the inside of my front door because the lock was old and sometimes didn't catch. The doorstop is what woke me up, because when he picked the lock, the door swung an inch and the stop dragged across the floor, and the sound was tiny but wrong. I opened my eyes. I didn't move. I listened. 2 footsteps in the living room, then a third set, lighter, 2 men in the living room, one moving down the hallway toward the bedroom. My medical bag was on the floor next to the bed. I want to tell you I had a plan. I did not have a plan. I had training. I had the automatic brain of a person who has run 20,000 codes and who, when the adrenaline hits, stops thinking and starts moving. I slid off the bed onto the floor on the far side, the side against the wall. My bag was on the near side. I reached over the mattress by feel. My hand found the zipper. I opened it 1 tooth at a time because the zipper was loud and my life depended on it not being. I took out one thing, a scalpel, number 11 blade, still in its sterile wrapper. I had the wrapper open by feel. The blade was 1.5 inches of carbon steel. It was all I had that would cut a man and not require me to be bigger than him. The bedroom door opened. He was a shadow in a black jacket. He had a pistol with a suppressor on it, which, this is a thing nobody tells you, is not quiet. It makes a sound like a heavy book hitting a table. The first shot hit the pillow where my head had been 4 seconds earlier. The second went into the headboard. Stuffing drifted down in the dark like snow. The third shot didn't happen, because by then I was behind him, and I was a doctor who had spent 4 years of residency learning exactly where the Achilles tendon attaches and exactly how deep you have to cut to sever it, and the scalpel went in and I turned my wrist and I pulled. He went down. He didn't scream. He made a sound like someone trying to swallow a sound, because his training told him not to make noise, and his body couldn't help him with that anymore. He was still holding the gun, but his grip had gone loose with the pain. I took it out of his hand. I had never held a gun in my life. It was heavier than I expected and warmer than I expected. The second man was in the hallway. He heard the fall. He came around the corner and he saw me. He saw a woman in a t-shirt with a gun, and his face did a very small thing, a calculation, and I think what saved my life is that he took a half second to aim, and I didn't. I pulled the trigger 4 times, because I didn't know how many it would take. He went down. I was already moving. The third man came through the kitchen. I went out the bedroom window onto the fire escape barefoot, in my pajamas, with my medical bag on one shoulder and a stranger's gun in the other, and I got 2 floors down before I realized my forearm was bleeding, though I don't remember being cut. The third man didn't follow me. He didn't have to. There was a 4th man in a car at the end of the block, and he stepped out as I hit the sidewalk, and I remember thinking, really distinctly, the thought forming word by word. I am going to die in the street in a t-shirt. And that is when the SUV came around the corner and hit him. Didn't hit him by accident. It came around the corner at 40 miles an hour, went up onto the sidewalk, and took him off his feet like a bowling pin, and 2 doors opened, and 3 men I recognized from Jae-hoon's house were running toward me with guns drawn, and the one in front, his name was Minwoo. He'd been on the gate the night before. I'd made him laugh once about his fantasy football lineup. Minwoo grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "Doctor, I'm sorry. We should have been faster. Please come with us now." I got in the SUV. I was shaking. Minwoo said into his earpiece, "We have her, alive, moving." I said, "How did you know?" He looked at me in the rearview mirror. He said very quietly, "Ma'am, the boss couldn't sleep tonight. He went down to the security room around 3 in the morning. We've had 2 men on your block every time you went home on a weekend you didn't know. Standing order from your first week. Around 2:40, the men on watch radioed in. There was a van 3 blocks from your apartment that had been sitting with its lights off since shortly after you got home. 2 people inside. Nobody had gotten out. And there was a second car at your intersection that was not one of ours. The boss read the report at 3. He knew the minute he saw it. He had teams rolling by 3:20. He came himself. We were 8 blocks behind him when your neighbor called in the shots. Ma'am, he was already coming. He was already coming." I didn't cry. I wanted to. I put my hand over my face, and I held it there for the 40 minutes it took to drive back to the house. And I did not cry because I was afraid that if I started, I would not be able to stop. Jae-hoon met us at the gate. He was not the man who had laughed in my medical suite 9 hours earlier. He was not the blank-faced man who had lived in my life for 6 weeks. He was a man who looked like he had aged 5 years between midnight and dawn. And when I got out of the SUV, he crossed the distance in 4 strides, and he took my face in both of his hands, and he looked at me the way I had looked at him in the ER the night we met, looking for the wound, looking for what was broken, needing to know what to fix. When he saw the cut on my arm, his whole body did a thing I don't have a word for. A flinch, but slower. A flinch made of anger. He said, "Who?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "I know." Then he said, "I'm sorry, I am so sorry. This is my fault, I should have." He stopped. He let go of my face. He took a step back and his hands were shaking, which I had never seen them do, not when he was shot, not when he woke up on my table. He took me inside. He sat me on the kitchen counter. He took my arm in his hand and he turned it over, the cut side up, and he cleaned it himself with saline and gauze from the bag he brought from the suite, and his hands stopped shaking as soon as he had a job to do. I watched him work. He was careful. He was very, very careful. He touched me like the cut was the only part of me he was allowed to touch, and he touched it like it was made of something rare. He said without looking up, "They knew I laughed." I didn't understand. He said, "There are cameras, outside the house, at the gate, and across the street in the Oak. I knew about them. We've been letting them run for a month because we wanted them to see me grieving. My uncle's idea. He said if I looked weak enough, whoever had Minjun killed would get bold, would make a move, so we let them watch. And we knew they had somebody inside too, someone on my staff reporting out. We hadn't caught them yet. Honestly, we'd stopped looking because whoever it was had only been reporting what we wanted them to report. Last night, whoever it is saw me laugh, or saw me come out of the suite changed, and they picked up a phone." He paused. He pressed a gauze square against the cut. When a grieving man laughs, it tells the people watching that he is healing. They had a clock. The clock ran out last night at 8:15. He looked up at me for the first time since I'd sat down. He said, "They didn't come for me, they came for you." I said, "Why me?" He said, "Because they watch me watch you dance." I couldn't breathe for a second. He said, "I'm so sorry, Amara, I'm so sorry." I said, "Your brother, Minjun, he was killed." He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Everyone thinks it was a car accident. It wasn't. I don't have proof. I've known for a month." And I said, "Because I am a doctor and I cannot stop being one even when I want to. Can I see the file?" He shouldn't have shown me the file. I want you to know that. Giving a civilian full access to a mafia family's private medical records is the kind of thing that gets people killed even in better circumstances. But he did it, and I don't think it was only because he was desperate. I think it was because somewhere in the last 6 weeks he had decided I was trustworthy, and that morning, in that kitchen, he acted on the decision. His brother's name was Seo Min-jun. He was 26. He was the softer one, Jae-hoon told me, the one who was supposed to leave the family business, who had been in graduate school studying architecture, who had built a paper model of a library on his desk in his bedroom that Jae-hoon hadn't let anyone touch since the funeral. He'd been in his car on the highway when the car went off a bridge. Single vehicle. No other drivers. The autopsy said cardiac event behind the wheel. Cardiac event. A 26-year-old with no heart history and a stress echo from 3 months before that was clean. I read the autopsy in the medical suite with the door closed while Jae-hoon paced outside. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time with the toxicology panel next to it, and I saw it. 2 things. The first was the potassium. It was elevated, but within a range that the pathologist had written off as post-mortem hemolysis, because potassium rises in blood after death. Except the number was too high for a draw taken that early, and there was a second number, the magnesium, which was low in a way that didn't fit. A massive IV potassium push stops the heart. It also drops the magnesium transiently. The pathologist hadn't been looking. The second thing was the needle mark. There was one, noted in the report, one line easy to miss. Left forearm dorsal aspect, which was the problem, because nobody starts an IV on the dorsal aspect of the forearm. Paramedics go for the antecubital, which is the crook of the elbow, or the dorsum of the hand, which is the back of the hand. Dorsal forearm is where you start a line if you're giving something slowly into a patient who is not resisting, who is probably sitting up. Not a trauma line, a clinical line. A line that somebody put in calmly, in advance, somewhere quiet. Somebody injected Minjun with a lethal dose of potassium chloride before he got in the car. The potassium stopped his heart. The car went off the bridge. The autopsy caught the potassium and wrote it off. And potassium chloride in that dose is not something a street thug has in his backpack. It's something a doctor has. Or somebody with access to a doctor. I walked out of the suite. Jae-hoon was sitting on the stairs with his head in his hands. He looked up when he heard me. I said, "Who was your family's doctor before me?" He said, "Dr. Cho. He retired 8 weeks ago." I said, "Retired where?" He went very still. He said, "I don't know. My uncle handled the arrangements." Here is where the story becomes difficult to tell, because I have to tell you about a man loving his uncle. Jae-hoon's uncle was his father's younger brother. His name was Seo Kwang-sik. When Jae-hoon's father was murdered 19 years ago, the uncle raised both boys, took them hunting, taught them to shoot, taught them the business. He had been at every birthday. He had held Minjun at his baptism. He had been the one to identify Minjun's body at the morgue. He had wept. Jae-hoon had told me about the uncle weeping, with something like surprise in his voice, because he said his uncle had not cried since his own wife had died, 22 years before. Jae-hoon's father had named a succession order the year before he was killed. Jae-hoon first, then Minjun, only then the uncle, 19 years of being third in line. There was also an old understanding in the family, unwritten but honored, that if the head of the family was incapacitated, truly incapacitated, not dead but broken, a senior male relative could step in as regent until the head was fit to lead again. The uncle had raised both boys after their father was killed. The uncle was the natural choice. Half the lieutenants had already stopped calling Jae-hoon directly and started calling the uncle instead. Once that kind of transfer took root, it did not uproot. 4 weeks since the funeral, the clock was not hypothetical. The clock was the funeral itself. I watched Jae-hoon realize. I watched it happen in real time. I watched his face close down the way it had been closed for 6 weeks, and then open into something so terrible I had to look away. He didn't cry. He said, "How sure are you?" I said, "I'm a doctor. I'm never 100%. But I'm Jae-hoon. I'm sure enough to bet your life on it. I'm sure enough to bet mine." He said, "My uncle is coming to dinner tomorrow night. He called an hour ago. He said he heard about the attack on my doctor. He said he wanted to come make sure I was all right." He looked up at me. He said, "Will you be there?" I want to tell you about the night before the dinner, because it is the part I do not tell anyone. I was in the medical suite at 11. I was loading syringes, 3 of them capped in a row on the counter. I had been staring at them for an hour deciding what to draw up. I heard him on the stairs. I knew his walk by then. He came in. He was in a soft gray sweater, sleeves pushed up. The tattoos on his forearms looked almost tender in the fluorescent light. He sat down on the exam table, which was the only time in 6 weeks I had seen him sit on the exam table when he was not hurt. He watched me work for a while. He said, "Why did you take this job?" I said, "My mother, I told you." He said, "I know that part. I'm asking why you stayed." I put the second syringe down. I looked at him. I said, "The first week I was here, I opened the wrong door looking for the laundry room and I found a boy. 17. Maybe one of your men's little brother. He'd cut his hand open trying to fix a bike chain. He wouldn't go to the hospital. He was scared. I stitched him up at the kitchen table and I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up and he said a pilot. So I told him to keep the hand still for 2 weeks. I was quiet for a second. I said I stayed because I realized this house has people in it. Not just you, people, boys, somebody's little brother who wants to be a pilot, and you all need a doctor, and I'm a doctor. He was quiet for a very long time. He said, "Are you going to tell me to stop? After tomorrow, the business, all of it?" I said, "No, Jae-hoon, you're a grown man. You get to decide what you are. I'm telling you I'm a doctor and I'm going to keep being one. That's all I'm telling you." He got off the exam table. He crossed the room slowly, like he was giving me time to move. I didn't move. He stopped about 6 inches from me. He put his forehead against mine. He did not kiss me. His breath was warm and it smelled like the tea he drank in the evenings. I closed my eyes. He said very quietly, "Amara." I said, "Jae-hoon." He said, "I have never been afraid of dying, not since I was 11. Tomorrow I am afraid." I said, "Of dying?" He said, "Of you." I put my hand flat against his chest. The scar was under my palm on the left, where the bullet fragment was. I could feel his heart underneath the scar, too fast. I said, "We have to sleep tonight. We have to be clear tomorrow." He said, "I know." He didn't move. I said, "Jae-hoon, please go upstairs." He took a step back. His eyes were wet, but he did not cry. He nodded. He said, "Tomorrow." I said, "Tomorrow." He went upstairs. I finished loading the syringes. I slept for 2 hours on the exam table under a blanket one of his men left for me silently sometime around 3. I don't know which one of them. I never asked. Dinner was at 7. I wore the only real dress I had with me, navy blue, with a cardigan over it because my hands were cold. My medical bag was on a chair near the dining room, and inside it were 3 syringes loaded with midazolam, a fast-acting sedative, the same one we use for procedures, in a dose big enough to put down a horse but not kill it. Jae-hoon had asked me to load something lethal. I said no. I said his uncle was an old man and I was a doctor and I wasn't going to commit murder at a dinner table, even for him. He said okay. He said I was right. He said he just wanted his uncle alive long enough to answer questions. The uncle was a handsome man in his late 60s with silver at his temples and the hands of an old piano player. He hugged Jae-hoon at the door. He kissed the top of his head. He said something in Korean that made Jae-hoon's face do the slow flinch, and then he turned to me and smiled, and he said in English, "You must be the brave doctor. Jae-hoon tells me you saved his life twice now. We owe you a great debt." I said, I'm glad he's alive." The uncle said, "So am I." We sat down. We ate the first course. I don't remember what it was. I remember forks on porcelain. I remember the uncle talking about the stock market and a racehorse he'd bought and a trip to Jeju he was planning in the spring. I remember Jae-hoon watching him the whole time with a stillness I had not seen in any human being, not even in the dying. Over the second course, Jae-hoon said, very quietly, "Uncle, where did Dr. Cho go?" The uncle stopped chewing. Just for a second, he smiled. He said, "Retirement, some island. I can get you the address if you want to send a card." Jae-hoon said, "He's dead, isn't he?" The uncle set his fork down. He said, "Why would you say that, Jae-hoon-ah?" And Jae-hoon said, "Because Min-jun was poisoned with potassium chloride, injected into the dorsal aspect of the left forearm, slowly, by somebody he trusted enough to sit still for, and the only person in this family with the access and the training and the trust was Dr. Cho. And if Cho were alive, he would be the only person who could name the man who paid him. So, Uncle, where is Cho?" The uncle's face did not move. I have never seen a face not move like that. It was not calm. It was the absence of calm. It was the absence of everything. He reached inside his suit jacket. Jae-hoon's men were not in the room. That was the plan. The nearest guard was 20 feet away behind a closed door. Jae-hoon had wanted his uncle to feel alone. Jae-hoon had wanted his uncle to feel safe. I was 3 feet from my bag. I moved first. I had the syringe in my hand before the uncle's hand cleared his jacket, and I had the needle in the side of his neck before his gun was fully out of the holster, and I pushed the plunger with my thumb and I said, "I'm sorry," because I am a doctor and old habits die hard, and this time I did not really mean it. The uncle slumped forward into his plate. His gun hit the floor and spun once and stopped against the leg of my chair. Jae-hoon picked up a small silver bell by his water glass and rang it once, very softly. The door opened. His men came in. I don't know what happened after that. I didn't ask. I am a doctor. I save lives. That night I saved 2 mine and Jae-hoon's, because if I had not moved when I did, the uncle would have shot his nephew over the soup course, and the family would have been the uncle's by morning. That is all I let myself know about it. That is all I am going to let you know either. 3 weeks later, a man came to the house with a signed confession in his hand and a list of names on a folded piece of paper. Jae-hoon burned both in the fireplace in front of me without reading them. He said he did not need them anymore. He said the only person who had needed to know the truth was him, and he knew. I did not ask what that meant. A doctor does not ask every question. A doctor asks the ones that keep people alive. 2 nights after the dinner, Jae-hoon came down to the medical suite. I was pretending to reorganize the pharmacy cabinet again. I hadn't slept much. I had been replaying the kitchen and the dinner and the men in my apartment, and I had been trying to figure out what I was still doing in that house. He was in the soft gray sweater again. He leaned in the doorway the way he had leaned 1,000 times. I thought, quietly, I have loved him for longer than I have known I was loving him. He said, "You can leave. Whenever you want. I'll pay out the contract. I'll pay your mother's medical bills in full. I'll pay your sister's house off if you want that. You don't owe me anything. Whatever you want." I said, "Is that what you want?" He was quiet for a long time. He said, "No." I said, "Then ask me to stay." He said, "Stay." I said, "Okay." He crossed the room. He stopped about a foot away. He looked at me, really looked, and he said very quietly, "You gave me back my life, you know that. I did not laugh for a month. I did not think I was ever going to. And then you danced in my house with a bottle of saline and you brought me back. I did not mean to love you. I am telling you because I do not want to lie about it. I am not asking you to love me back. I am asking you to know." I said, "Jae-hoon." I said, "I know." I took his hand. I said, "Put on the music." He looked at me like I was speaking a language he didn't know. I said, "Put on the Burna Boy song. Play it." He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. He played it. And I took his hand, and I danced with him in the medical suite at 2 in the morning, barefoot on the tile. He was terrible at it. Genuinely terrible. He was stiff and he kept looking at his feet, and at one point he stepped on mine and he laughed, out loud, twice, and I put my hand on the back of his neck over the tattoo there, and I pulled his head down and I kissed him. He kissed me back like he had been saving it, like it had been on a high shelf for months, and he had just been told he could have it. He kissed me with his hand on the small of my back and his other hand in my hair, and the music was still playing, and my hair tie slipped out, finally, the whole way and fell somewhere on the floor, and neither of us cared. When he pulled back, he had his forehead against mine and his eyes were closed and he was breathing hard and he said, "Amara, Amara, okay, okay." I said, "Okay." That was 6 months ago. I am still his doctor. My mother finished her second round of chemo. She is in remission. She sent Jaehoon a handwritten card that said, "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," and he kept it on his desk for 2 months before I noticed and told him to put it in a drawer because it was embarrassing. He put it in the drawer. He did not throw it away. He learned my mother's medication schedule. He knows the names of my sister's kids. The boy wants to be a pilot still. He is still a dangerous man. I know, I am not a fool. I hear things I do not ask about. I treat men who come in at 3 in the morning with wounds I do not file. I have an understanding with myself about what I know and what I choose not to. I am not pretending. I am a doctor. I took an oath about a lot of things and I break some of them every week and I live with it, and I live with him, and I live. He still does not laugh for anyone else. He laughs for me, quietly, in the kitchen in the mornings when he thinks no one else can hear. And every morning, before I go down to the suite, I dance for 5 minutes in the kitchen, Burna Boy, mostly. Sometimes Thames. Once, last week, Rihanna, which he did not approve of and we had a small argument about, while he watches me from the doorway with a cup of Jeju tangerine tea in his hand and pretends he isn't. My name is Amara. I am alive. I am in love with a dangerous man. And the boy who was not supposed to laugh for the rest of his life laughs every morning now, softly, into a cup of tea, at a doctor in bare feet who still cannot keep her hair tie in place. He thinks no one hears him. I always do. I always will.